Hello and welcome back to the First Love Project podcast. I'm Dr. Jori Shaffer, the show's host and creator, and it is my joy and pleasure to welcome you back today. Welcome to you returning listeners. I'm so glad you're here, and welcome to anyone who's found us for the first time. It's no accident that you're here today, friends, so please don't run off quite yet. Please stick around for a bit, and let's see what all the Lord has for us today. You know, God is so good to us to give us His Word. And as we spend time in His Word, we learn more of Him. We learn His character. We see how He has loved and cared for His people, how He's been compassionate toward His people. All of us have sinned and we've fallen short of His glory and we've sinned against Him, and yet He still loves us. Yet He still makes a way for us to come to know Him more, and I'm just so thankful for that. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this First Love Project was to help us to return to the one who loved us first, and we do that in the pages of His Word. And so, depending on the day of the week that it is, we look at different portions of Scripture. So on Mondays, we look at the law. On Tuesdays, the Gospels. On Wednesdays, wisdom and poetry. On Thursdays, the letters. On Fridays, the books of prophecy. And on Saturdays, we look at the books of history. And on Sundays, we're right now going just verse by verse through different Psalms. But I love that we get to do this together. What a blessing that we can do this. And it is Saturday, the 13th day of June, 2026. And this is the 153rd episode of the First Love Project. And when we think about those history books, most of course, we know like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they have history in them. Some of the Gospels certainly have history. Some of the letters have history, but the main history books that we think about are those that come after the law. So we think about Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And then in the New Testament, we think about Acts as the big history books. So today we are in the book of Ruth. And I love this because this is telling us about how God continued to take care of His people. This was before King David was born, because we'll see that King David will come in Ruth's lineage. We'll see that a little later. But this was after the children of Israel had came out of Egypt, after they had wandered in the wilderness. And so I love that we get to see this wonderful account. Now, we started in Ruth at the beginning of this podcast and talked about how Ruth was from Moab and she married a Hebrew man and lived with him and his mother and father and his brother and his wife. But the husband died and then the two sons died. So all who were left was Ruth and her sister-in-law Oprah, and then her Orpah, and then her mother-in-law Naomi. And Naomi, after her sons and her husband died, was going to go back to Bethlehem. And she told her daughters-in-law to go back to their family. Orpah went back, but Ruth said, I'm not going to leave you. Ruth had seen how God had worked in their family, even though there was much difficulty. And so she decided to stay with Naomi. And so we see that they were on hard times. You know, hard times had come upon them, but God continued to help. And one of the ways that we see this, when I call these history sections grace in the remembering, is that we look back at the history and we see God's faithfulness. The people in these accounts knew of God's faithfulness and they trusted Him even though it was hard. And that's what we see with Naomi. Ruth would be able to witness how God took care of His people, and we'll see it very much in today's account. And so I just love that. History is so important for us. That's why it's so important for us to read these accounts all throughout Scripture, is because we see the faithfulness of God. But where I'm going to pick up here is, let's see, in verse 14 of chapter 2. The last time we were in Ruth, we did Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 through 13, where Naomi went to, or told Ruth to go glean in one of the fields. And so this picks up and tells what happens while she was doing that. It says, at the mealtime, Boaz, who owned the fields, said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it to her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young men, lest in another field you be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. There's so much here, but we know that Naomi knew the faithfulness of God, even though she called herself bitter because she had had such loss. But she trusted God. She trusted God with what to tell Ruth, and Ruth knew that Ruth was able to see how God would take care of her. And they knew this because they knew the character of God. And I love that Naomi was able to remember that Boaz was in their family, so he would later be able to be what's known as a kinsman redeemer. But we can look back at these and just see how God orchestrated each part. They had come back because Ruth and Naomi had come to Bethlehem with just nothing. They had lost the men in their lives, but they came back and God continued to take care of them. And that's how he had done all along. That's how he does for us. And may we not forget that. May we see God in all the details in our lives, even when we think we don't understand it, because he does take care of us. And he had it all mapped out. And then King David would be in the lineage of Ruth. Ruth, who was a Moabitess, who was not even a Hebrew, who was not of the children of Israel. God would graft her in and take care of her. And it's because she believed, because she trusted, because she had seen and heard of this wonderful God. May we not forget that as well, and may we share it with others. Blessings to you, friends. Until next time.